Hold up. I'm hearing some crime sound going on big analysis. You know what? We screw cause you gotta see what's going on in LA right now.
Today, people talk about traveling to the moon like it's just another destination. You hear it everywhere. Private companies planning missions, billionaires funding rockets, talk of lunar bases, and even tourism. It sounds close. It sounds possible. It even sounds inevitable, as if the moon is just waiting for the next visitor. But that's the version of the story people like to tell. The comfortable version, the simplified version. Because the truth is far different. Going to the moon has never been ordinary. It has never been routine. And it has never, at any point in history, been safe. Long before the headlines, before the celebrations, before the words "mission successful" were ever spoken, 3 men were sent into the unknown on a journey no human had ever completed. No guarantee of return, no real margin for error, no second attempt. Just a spacecraft, a fragile system keeping them alive, and a destination that was never meant for human life. If anything had gone wrong, there would have been no rescue, no recovery, just silence. This is not just the story of a victory. It is the story of how close humanity came to losing everything in the attempt. In 1969, at the height of global tension and technological rivalry, the United States made a decision that would define an era. They would send humans to the moon, not machines, not unmanned probes, humans. It was a bold decision, but also a dangerous one, because no one had ever done it before, and no one could fully predict what would happen. At the center of this mission was a man who didn't look like history in the making, Neil Armstrong. He wasn't loud, he wasn't charismatic, he didn't chase attention, but he had something far more important: control. Armstrong was a test pilot, a man trained to operate under pressure, to stay calm when systems failed, and to make decisions when there was no time to think twice. He had already faced life-threatening situations before, and survived, not because of luck, but because of discipline, because of precision, because of control. And for a mission like this, that was exactly what was needed. Alongside him were 2 other men, Buzz Aldrin, analytical, highly technical, deeply focused. Michael Collins, steady, reliable, the one who would remain alone in orbit. Each of them had a role. Each of them had a responsibility. And if any one of them failed, the mission could collapse. Together, they formed the crew of Apollo 11. But despite how it would later be remembered, this was not a journey of exploration. It was a calculated risk, a mission where success was uncertain and failure could be permanent. On July 16, 1969, the rocket stood ready, massive, towering over the launch pad, a machine built with a single purpose to break free from Earth itself. From a distance, it looked calm, controlled, almost peaceful. But inside that rocket, there was nothing calm about what was about to happen. The countdown began. Seconds moved slowly, but everyone knew what was coming. Then, ignition. The engines roared to life with a force so powerful it shook the ground for miles. Flames erupted beneath the rocket. A controlled explosion, sustained just long enough to push thousands of tons of metal into the sky. Inside the spacecraft, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins felt the full force of it. The vibration was intense. The noise was overwhelming. The acceleration pressed them deep into their seats. Their bodies were no longer moving naturally. They were being forced upward, against gravity, against everything the human body is designed for. This wasn't smooth. It wasn't graceful. It was violent. Controlled, but violent. Because escaping Earth's gravity is not a gentle process. It is a battle. A battle between physics and engineering and human endurance. And once that rocket left the ground, everything changed. There was no turning back. No safe return to the launch pad. No pause. No reset. From that moment on, they were committed. Committed to a journey that had no guarantee of ending well. Once they entered space, everything changed. Not just the environment around them, but the way they experienced existence itself. Inside the spacecraft, there was no longer any sense of up or down. The familiar pull of Earth had disappeared. Their bodies drifted weightless, suspended in a place where human instincts no longer applied. But the physical change was only the beginning, because space is often described as silent, calm, peaceful, still. But that description is misleading. Space is not peaceful. It is indifferent. There is no atmosphere to carry sound, no air to breathe, no natural protection from what lies beyond. Every breath the astronauts took was manufactured, carefully regulated, measured, delivered by a system that had to work every second without failure. Because if it didn't, there would be no warning, no time to react, just the sudden realization that survival had ended. Beyond the thin walls of the spacecraft, radiation moved freely through space. Not visible, not detectable by human senses, but constant. Energy from the sun, cosmic particles from distant sources, passing through space and through anything in their path, including them. The spacecraft itself, despite all its engineering, was only a limited shield, a temporary barrier. And then there was the isolation. For the first time in human history, these men were truly separated from Earth. Not just by distance, but by environment. There was no natural connection left. Everything that kept them alive was artificial. Every system mattered. Every switch, every calculation. Because out there is no recovery, no correction. Space does not try to harm you. It simply does not support your existence. And that is what makes it deadly. As the spacecraft moved deeper into its journey, the moon grew larger. At first it had been distant, a fixed object in the darkness. But now it was becoming real. A surface, a destination, a place they were actually going to reach. And with that realization came a shift. Because up until that point, the mission had been about travel. Now, it was about execution. Everything ahead was untested. There were no previous missions to guide them, no successful human landing to learn from. Every calculation, every maneuver was based on theory, simulation, and expectation, not experience. And that difference mattered. Because in space, even small uncertainties can become critical. The closer they moved toward the moon, the more the margin for error narrowed. There would be no second attempt, no chance to try again. If something went wrong during the landing, there was no backup plan that guaranteed survival. No rescue mission waiting nearby, no immediate support. Just distance and silence. Inside the spacecraft, the atmosphere was controlled, focused, disciplined. But beneath that control was awareness. They were moving towards something that had never been attempted before. And once they began the descent, there would be no easy way out. The moment came. The spacecraft separated. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin entered the lunar module Eagle and began their descent. Above them, orbiting alone, Michael Collins waited. The distance between them grew. Now, the mission was divided. At first, everything proceeded as expected. The descent engine fired. The module adjusted its trajectory. Data flowed in. Numbers remained within range. It looked controlled. Then, suddenly, an alarm. A sharp interruption in the process. Unexpected. The onboard computer was overloaded. Too much data. Too many tasks being processed at once. For a moment, there was uncertainty. Inside the module, Armstrong and Aldrin remained focused. They did not react emotionally. They waited for confirmation. Back on Earth, in mission control, engineers moved quickly. They analyzed the signal, checked the codes, made a decision. Continue. The alarm sounded again and again. Each time it introduced doubt. Each time it forced a decision. Abort the mission or keep going. Time was limited. Fuel was decreasing. And then, another problem became clear. They were drifting toward a landing area that was not safe. The surface below was uneven, covered with rocks and hazards. Landing there could damage the module, or worse, make takeoff impossible. At that point, Armstrong made a decision. He took manual control, no longer relying on the computer, no longer following the planned path. Now, it was entirely in his hands. He guided the module forward, searching for a safer location. Every movement had to be precise. Every adjustment mattered. Fuel levels dropped, rapidly. Mission Control called it out. 60 seconds, then 30 seconds. There was no margin left. Inside the cockpit, there was no panic, no sudden movement, only concentration, only discipline, only a man manually guiding a spacecraft over an unknown surface with seconds of fuel remaining. And then, contact. The signal came through. They had landed, but not under normal conditions, not according to plan. They had reached the moon with almost nothing left. Hours after landing, inside the lunar module, Eagle, there was no celebration, no sense of relief, only procedure. Every action that followed the landing had to be done carefully, in sequence, without error. Because landing on the moon was only part of the mission. Surviving it was something else entirely. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began preparing to step outside. They checked their suits, their oxygen supply, their communication systems. Each connection was verified, each seal was inspected, because once the hatch opened, there would be no protection left except what they wore. And what they wore was all that stood between life and immediate death. Back on Earth, millions of people were watching. Television screens flickered across cities and homes, voices lowered, rooms went quiet. An entire world waiting for a moment that had never happened before. But what the world saw was only the surface of the story. What they didn't see was how final that moment truly was. There was no rescue team waiting nearby, no secondary system ready to intervene. If something malfunctioned, a suit failure, a loss of pressure, a misstep, there would be no recovery, no second attempt, just distance, just silence. Armstrong moved toward the hatch, deliberate, controlled. He descended the ladder slowly, step by step, testing each movement. There was no room for assumption, only confirmation. And then he reached the final step. For a brief moment, he paused. Not for drama, not for the cameras, but because what came next had never been done. Then he stepped forward. His boot pressed into the surface, soft but firm. And in that instant, he became the first human being to stand on the moon. A moment that would be remembered as simple, as symbolic, as historic. But behind that moment was risk. Behind that step was the understanding that there was no way out if anything went wrong. It was not just a step forward, it was a commitment with no guarantee of return.
The surface of the moon is often imagined as quiet, calm, still, almost peaceful. But that impression is misleading, because the moon is not designed for life. It is a place of extremes. Without an atmosphere, there is nothing to regulate temperature. no air to distribute heat, no environment to soften conditions. As a result, temperatures shift violently. Under direct sunlight, heat rises to levels that can damage equipment. In shadow, cold becomes intense and immediate. There is no gradual change, no transition, only contrast. The ground beneath their feet was not solid in the way Earth's surface is. It was covered in a layer of fine dust, powder-like, but sharp. Each particle jagged, abrasive. It clung to their suits, entered joints, covered surfaces. And because there is no weather on the moon, no wind, no rain, that dust does not erode or soften over time. It remains sharp, unchanged. Every movement Armstrong and Aldrin made had to be deliberate. Balance was different. Gravity was weaker but not absent. Each step carried uncertainty. Each action required adjustment. And surrounding them was silence. Not the kind of silence experienced on Earth, but absolute silence. No air to carry sound, no background noise, no natural presence. Only the sound of their own breathing inside their helmets, and the awareness that beyond the thin layer of their suits, there was nothing. No protection, no support, just an environment that does not allow human life. The moon does not resist you. It does not challenge you. It simply exists, without any capacity to sustain you. And that is what makes it dangerous. After completing their tasks on the surface, collecting samples, conducting experiments, documenting observations, Armstrong and Aldrin returned to the lunar module. The mission was not over. In many ways, the most critical phase was still ahead, because reaching the moon is only part of the challenge. Leaving it is another. Inside the module, they prepared for ascent. Every system was checked again, because this launch had to work. There was no alternative. If the ascent engine failed to ignite, they would remain where they were. No rescue mission could reach them in time. No backup system could replace what was required. They would be stranded, not temporarily, permanently. Above them, orbiting the moon, Michael Collins waited alone, maintaining position, monitoring systems, preparing for the next phase. He was the only link between the lunar surface and Earth. If the rendezvous failed, there would be no return. The ascent began. The engine ignited. The module lifted from the surface of the moon, leaving behind the landing site and everything it represented. Now, precision mattered more than ever. They had to navigate through space and align perfectly with the command module. Speed, timing, position, everything had to match. There was no room for approximation, no tolerance for error, because missing that connection even slightly would mean separation. And in space, separation becomes distance, and distance becomes final. Step by step, calculation by calculation, they closed the gap, until finally they reconnected, docked, and once again became a complete crew. It was a moment that lasted seconds, but carried the weight of the entire mission, because without it, there would have been no return. When the crew returned safely to Earth, the world responded the only way it knew how, with celebration. Headlines filled newspapers across continents. Television broadcasts replayed the landing. Voices described it as a triumph of science, of courage, of human progress. It was called a success, and in many ways, it was. 3 men had traveled farther than anyone before them. They had landed on another world and returned. But what the world saw was only the outcome, not the reality that made that outcome uncertain. Because behind the success, there was a truth that was never meant to be public at the time. Before the mission began, preparations had already been made for the possibility that it would fail. Not quietly, not hypothetically, formally. A statement written in advance to be delivered if the crew did not return. A speech prepared for a different ending. one where the mission would not be remembered as a victory, but as a loss. Because those who planned the mission understood something clearly. They understood the risks. They understood the limitations of the technology, the unpredictability of space, the narrow margins that separated success from disaster. And they understood that once those astronauts left Earth, there was a real possibility they might never come back. The landing itself had come close to failure. The descent had nearly run out of fuel. The landing site had not been safe. Critical decisions had been made in seconds. And even after landing, the mission was far from secure. Every phase carried its own risk. Every step depended on systems that had to function perfectly in an environment that does not allow for mistakes. What history remembers is the moment of success. What it rarely acknowledges is how fragile that success truly was, how easily it could have gone another way, and how prepared everyone involved was for that possibility.
Today, once again, the conversation has returned. The moon is no longer just a symbol of the past. It is being discussed as part of the future. New missions are being planned. New technologies are being developed. New ambitions are being announced. There is talk of returning, of staying, of building. And from a distance, it sounds familiar. It sounds achievable. But the conditions have not changed. The moon remains what it has always been, a place without atmosphere, without natural protection, without any environment that supports human life. The challenges that existed in 1969 have not disappeared. They have only been managed with better tools, better systems, better understanding. But management is not elimination. The risks are still present. Radiation still moves through space. Mechanical systems still have limits. Human bodies are still not designed for that environment. And distance still matters. Because no matter how advanced technology becomes, there is still no immediate rescue in space. No instant recovery. Only preparation. Only precision. Only the hope that everything works as intended. Yes, we can reach the moon. That has been proven. But reaching it is only part of the equation. Sustaining life there, operating safely, and returning without failure remain some of the most complex challenges humans have ever attempted. Going to the moon is not impossible. History has already shown that, but it has never been simple, and it has never been safe. Because beyond the achievement, beyond the headlines, beyond the moment the world remembers, there is a reality that does not change. The moon is not designed for us. It does not adapt. It does not protect. It does not forgive mistakes. And that is why every mission to reach it is not just an exploration, but a risk. A calculated one, a controlled one, but a risk nonetheless. Because in the end, the greatest challenge has never been getting there. It has always been making it back alive.